hey, I thought I'd read read a little bit while I was still dressed for church, so you wouldn't think I always look raggedy. But alas, it is still the Prince Warriors and the Swords of Rima, Volume 3. We're on chapter 25 now. We are getting very close. Chapter 25, Underfoot. Sparks led the Prince Warriors to the entrance of the cave, which the boys had never seen before. The water had always brought them to the centrum, right smack dab in the center of the cave. I never knew there was a way out of the cave, Evan said. He raced ahead as soon as he saw daylight at the end of the tunnel. He peered out into the bright sunlight and gave a yelp of delight at what he saw. Tannen, he shouted, throwing his arms around the big green dragon's neck. Where have you... He tried to get the words out, but he was too excited. You're okay? Warp? Tannen sounded like he had a severe sore throat. An ugly scar on his neck and several more at the base of his tail, where the thorns had pierced him, told the story. But he opened his mouth in a wide Tannen smile and drooled happily. Xavier, Levi, and Mr. J.R. came up to greet him as well, patting his head as if he were a big dog. Can't tell you how glad we are to see you, said Xavier. Yeah, wait till we tell the girls, said Levi. Then he frowned a little, wondering if he would ever see them again. The journey they were about to embark upon would not be easy or safe. As Evan climbed up on Tannen's back, Xavier began to ask a string of questions. How do we know if the girls are in the fortress? What if they're somewhere else? How are we going to find them? And what about the books? How can we get to them without Ponyroast or Victor knowing we're here? Assuming that's where Victor went. All these questions, said Mr. J.R. Don't you trust Ruach anymore? Or your armor? Or the instructions from the book? Of course I do. I'm not sure. So much has happened. I thought Victor was a good guy, you know. I actually liked him. I wanted to be like him. How could I be so wrong? What do you know about the enemy you face? Asked Mr. J.R. That he's a liar, a deceiver? Right. And what do you know about Ruach and the Source? That they are true and right, Xavier said slowly, thinking over the words as he spoke. But if Victor was working for the enemy and he could fool me, then how will I ever know who I can trust and who I can't? Mr. J.R. shook his head. I can't tell you that, but I know someone who can. Why don't you ask him? Is that what you do? Every single time, Mr. J.R. smiled. Come on, guys, Evan shouted, kicking his legs against Tannen's scaly back. Let's go already. Tannen echoed his enthusiasm with a garbled squawk. Oh, sure, Xavier said in a melancholy mumble. Let's go fly into enemy territory and fight some forgers and a creepy kid. Sounds like fun. He climbed up onto the dragon's back and sat in front of Evan between two spikes. Levi went up next, then Mr. J.R., who sat in front of him. I'm worried, Levi said to his dad, about Bean. What if... Let's not go there, said Mr. J.R. If I know Brianna, she's smart enough to evade the bad guys until we can find her. And Ivy, how are we going to get her out? What was the message you brought to Rook when you freed him from prison? Once freed, always free. Mr. J.R. nodded. Do you believe it? I guess so. Yes? Mr. J.R. nodded. Then let's go get him. Tannen took that as his cue to take off, but not before he opened his mouth and let out a blast of fire. Keep your arms and legs inside the dragon at all times, shouted Evan as he laughed at his own joke. Tannen spread his enormous wings and launched straight up into the gold-swept sky. They traveled swiftly, Tannen gliding on updrafts and dodging skypods, until the sky changed to a splotchy red-black, and the ground beneath them disappeared into a sea of dark mist. Strange angular formations jutted from the mist now and then, making Levi think of bones in an animal graveyard. He looked left and right, fearful of seeing one of those deadly black dragons tracking them, or a swarm of Ents about to attack. But the sky, other than the sky pods, was empty. Levi wondered about this. He wondered if Ponyrose wanted them to come, if this apparent peacefulness wasn't a lure into his trap, just like Victor had been. Tannen suddenly ducked his head and began to swoop lower. Levi looked over the side and saw the jagged outline of a new fortress breaking through the thick fog. It looked different from the old fortress, which had appeared more like a twisted maze of steel girders. This one seemed to be made of sharpened gray stone, with tall, pointy towers reaching through the clouds. "I see it," Levi called out. The others looked to where he pointed. Then Levi noticed they were headed dangerously close to the big, ugly skypod that hovered directly above the new fortress. "Hey, Dad," Levi said, tapping his father's shoulder. "Where's he going? He's going to crash into that skypod." Just then, Tannen flattened his wings and went into a full dive. Levi scrambled to grab onto the spike with both hands. "Whoa!" cried Evan. "I think we're landing," yelled Mr. J.R. Levi braced himself for one of Tannen's usual bumpy landings, but at the last second, Tannen pulled up, dropping his tail and reversing his wings. He landed almost gently, for him, on the top of the big ugly skypod. "Wait, why did we land here?" Xavier asked. "The fortress is below." "Maybe we'll have to rappel our way to the fortress," said Evan, sounding eager to try it. "No way," said Levi. The sky overhead was nearly black, making it hard to see very far beyond the glow of their breastplates. Levi could make out rocky plateaus and deep craters like the surface of the moon. He was overcome with a sense of utter desolation and stifled a wave of fear. This was about the loneliest place he had ever encountered. Tannen folded his wings and settled down on his belly. He bent his neck around and looked expectantly at his passengers, as if to say, "Well, what are you waiting for?" Except it came out as a soft, raspy "Gorp." Mr. J.R. slid from the dragon's back. The boys followed. They stood together on the skypod, looking around. "There's nothing here," said Xavier in a whisper. "We need to get to the fortress." "Tannen brought us here," said Mr. J.R. "He knows Skatos better than any of us. He was a slave here once, remember?" "So you're saying that we have to go through this skypod to get there?" asked Levi. "But it's huge. It's at least 5 times as big as any of the other ones." "I still think rappelling is our best bet," said Evan. "Or maybe a zip line." "There is no zip line to the fortress from here," said Xavier. He walked across the harsh floor of the skypod, thinking. He stopped, looking down at the ground at his boots. Then he recalled the instruction. "The enemy is under your feet." What had that meant? It sounded quite ridiculous. Under your feet. Xavier thought about that phrase over and over. Then all at once, the answer struck him like a bolt of lightning. "Under our feet," he exclaimed, stomping on the skypod surface. "The enemy is here in the skypod, under our feet." "You mean Ponyrose is in this skypod?" asked Evan. "Right now? And the girls too?" "Then the prison is here," said Levi. "Maybe Ponyrose moved it here when the original fortress was destroyed." "He was probably scared we'd destroy the next one too, right?" Evan said, puffing out his chest a little. "But how do we get inside?" asked Xavier. "Do you see a door anywhere?" There must be a way in, said Mr. J.R. He gazed around. That mound there, he pointed. There are several of them. They all look the same. Why don't we go take a look? The three boys scrambled up the mound and stood on the flat top. Don't see a door, said Xavier. Hold on, said Levi. He stomped hard in the center of the mound as if he were stomping on a spider. Immediately the surface dropped away, revealing a metal spiral staircase that glowed faintly green in the darkness below. Whoa, said Evan. How did you know? Asked Xavier. I saw it in a movie once, said Levi with a grin. Good work, said Mr. J.R. He turned to Tannen, who looked as though he had fallen asleep. Better go now, old friend. Stay close and keep an eye out for us. We're likely to be in a hurry when we come back. Tannen raised his head and nodded enthusiastically, crouched down, and then jumped straight up, fumbling a bit before getting his wings in working order. The boys watched him disappear behind one of the more ordinary sky pods strewn about the sky. If we come back, Xavier murmured. So, who wants to go first? Asked Evan, looking around at the others. I will, said Xavier with a sigh. He stepped down on the first step of the staircase. Levi followed him, wincing at the ghoulish green glow of the steps. It reminded him of the green light bulbs that had dangled from the ceiling of the prison in the fortress when they had gone to rescue Rook. There was something very unnatural and unsettling about the color. The staircase had no railing, nothing to hang on to. All around them was utter darkness. If I fell off, Levi thought, how far would I fall? Forever? The staircase wound around in an unending spiral until Levi became dizzy. He tried to concentrate on the dim outline of Xavier's back, glowing in the light of his own breastplate. This is making me dizzy, Evan said. Take it slow, said Mr. J.R., who went last. The space around them seemed to get smaller as they descended, the giant echoes of their boots diminishing the farther down they went. Like going down a funnel, Levi thought. He kept a tight hold on his sword with his free hand, fearing with every step to see an angry dragon or evil imp appear. But there was nothing to see except eerie, endless darkness. Finally, a bluish light appeared below them, a welcome change from that awful green. An opening, a doorway. Levi felt hopeful that this descent would soon end. Xavier stepped down from the last step and entered the glowing portal. Levi followed, then stopped in his tracks, completely baffled. For the room they had entered looked exactly like the cave. Waves of stalactites, glowing blue from within, dripped from the ceiling, while more glowing stalagmites formed small mountain ranges all around the perimeter. Darkened tunnels led off in various directions. The cave. How did we get back here? Levi asked. I'm confused, said Xavier. Look again, said Mr. J.R., coming into the room behind Evan. Do you see anything unusual? No sparks. Evan was the first to notice this. And no ruach, said Levi. But look, there's the book, said Xavier. He pointed to where the book lay, open on a fancy pedestal in the center of the cave. That can't be the real book, Levi said. He went over to check. Don't touch it, said Mr. J.R. It could be a trap. Nearly everything here is. Why does it look like the cave? Evan asked. Ponyrose is a great imitator, said Mr. J.R. And since he covets what belongs to the source, naturally he will try to imitate it. So Ponyrose is here, somewhere? Evan asked, a new chill in his voice, as if this adventure had suddenly taken a much darker turn than he realized. Yes, said Mr. J.R., but it is not our mission to seek him out. We're here only for Brianna and Ivy and the books. Let's hope he's taking a nap or something, said Evan. So which way to the prison? Xavier asked, looking around at each of the tunnels. They all looked the same, just as they did in the real cave. And where could Brianna be, if she's hiding? Asked Levi. Just then, one of the tunnels lit up with purple lights. There, said Evan. He started to march toward the tunnel. Mr. JR grabbed him and pulled him back. Forgetting something? The breastplate, Xavier said. He pointed to Evan's armor, which was blinking rapidly. Another trap? Asked Evan. Mr. JR nodded. The breastplate says to go that way, said Xavier, pointing to a different tunnel that was still in darkness. The others faced that direction. Their breastplates stopped blinking, shining a steady light. Right, said Mr. JR. Get your swords ready. The three boys pulled their kristin from their belts and pressed them to their breastplates, extending their swords. Okay, said Xavier. Let's go.